Brilliant. So should we make a soft start on this webinar now? Welcome to all of you. There's quite a lot of participants right now. How many are we now?
19.
How many were 19? Brilliant. That's really good. Just to let you all know that we are recording this session and we will be sharing it afterwards on our webpage as well. So just be aware. I just want you all to know that. During the presentation, it will be great if you turn off your microphones. So it's only the people who actually present that are speaking up. Otherwise, when we're so many people online, it could be a lot of background noise. If you do have questions while we do the presentation, feel free to put it in the chat. And then I hope that Annette and Paz as well will help keep track of the comments if there's questions we need to take while we're making the presentations. Otherwise, we will have a Q&A session where we can get a bit more debate in the end of this session and actually get some discussion going, hopefully. Yeah. So this is a webinar about collaborative decisions, and it's about introductions to CBA, choosing by advantage, and the Tableau method. Oh, a bit too fast. We have prepared a small presentation for you in the beginning to explain a bit to you about what we're doing here, to give you an introduction to the Tableau method. So Paz will start in a minute going through the actual method itself by an example. So we'll start with an example and you can see how it works. And Ed will then continue and explaining a bit more about the separate steps and some of the specifics about choosing by advantage. And I will then contribute with a case example of how we actually done it in practice on this project I'm working on. We then have time for some questions, and just before we kind of say goodbye to all of you, we'd like to tell you a bit about the upcoming events that we'll have and more whatever things that we're doing in this Collab Decisions framework, and also how you can get in touch with us. Yeah. So we never ever solved this one, Annette. I think we should introduce ourselves in this one. So I don't know if Paz, if you'll start with explaining just a few seconds about yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Paz Arroyo. I'm a PhD from UC Berkeley. I have done a lot of research on choosing by advantages, and this is something that it's really close to my heart. I think there's a lot of opportunity in the construction industry to make better decisions and to make it in a more collaborative way. Currently I'm a quality leader at DPR Construction. I'm here in San Francisco, California, with all the fires going on. So it's not a fun time, but we're gonna try to make this webinar.
Brilliant.
Should I continue?
Yes, thank you, Annette.
Okay, so my name is Annette Schöttle. This is also to my heart. I'm doing a lot of research with Paz and Randy since now a couple of years in CBA. My research areas began in the collaboration in the public sector. And then because the tendering procedure is so bad, as most people know, I came across CBA and started researching CBA to get used in the tendering procedure in the public sector. For work life, I'm also working as a consultant, especially specialized in lean implementation on construction projects in the design and in the construction phase of projects. Yep.
Thank you. And myself, Danish, working in London on Lower Thames Crossing at the moment for COVI as a lean manager, innovation manager. I've in the past been head of lean construction Denmark and been part of a client organization as well, but always been working with lean, and choosing by advantage is part of my toolbox as well for the last 4 years, I think. And I love these lean tools because they do bring more collaboration into the construction industry, and we definitely need that. And that's actually also our mission in this Collab Decisions that we set up, that we want to inspire and support the construction actually to make more collaborative decisions and a bit more collaborative behavior as well. And we want it to be more inclusive. There's so many people working in the industry that could be heard better if we had better tools to actually engage with people and get the knowledge into the right decisions and also into the right planning forums. So So that's why we set up this this small association or non-profit organization on collab decisions. Is there anything you want to add to that, Paz and Annette, now? No. We can get back to it in the end, and we can explain to you how you can get in touch with us and actually be part of this if you want to. But then I think actually we need to move into an example of the Tableau method. Before we do that, it might be worth saying that this is webinar number 2. And in the first webinar, we explained why decision making is so important. That webinar can still be found at the webpage if we want to revisit it. And that's why also we can jump a bit directly into the methods in this session.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Another disclaimer before we start with the method. This looks very, the example looks very mechanic, but it's not. And when you're, and I'm gonna present an example of a personal decision, but decision making, it's not a calculation, right? It's not, it's a process of discovery. It's something that it's going to happen in the future, and we don't know what's happening in the future, right? If we knew all the information, the decision will be easy. But there's a discovery process. There's a lot of conversations that need to happen to make a collaborative decision and to get resolution as a team. So with that, I'm going to go to a very mechanical example, okay? But don't think this is just getting the not a linear step-by-step process. Can you go to the next one, Randy? Thank you. So I'm not going to explain in detail the processes, but in general, these are the CBA steps for a tabular method. And I'm going to go one by one, and Annette will review this again at the end of the exercise. You go to the right. Thank you. So this is a very simple example. This is a real decision I had to make when I lost my cell phone a couple of years ago. And I had to go and at that time it was like 1.5 years ago. Those were the 2 iPhones that I was considering. This decision was already biased. I already had an iPhone, so I wanted another one. So it's not, of course, part of the decision-making process is identifying alternatives and finding what alternatives will work for you. This is a very simple example. So the 2 cell phones that I was considering was an iPhone 7, just the small size, 4.7 inches, and the iPhone 7 Plus, which is 5.5 inches. So how do I differentiate these alternatives? What I really need to think through when I'm going through choosing by advantages is thinking, okay, how do I make this decision? What matters to me, and how that it's actually part of the alternatives. It's not things that I care about, but are not related to the alternatives, right? So in choosing by advantages, we always want to think about what are the differences between the alternatives. Can you go to the next one? So the first step is to, well, alternatives was step 1. Then we have to define factors and define criteria. So what are things that actually make a difference in terms of this solve? The dimension, of course, I mean, how you're going to hold it, it will make a difference, at least for me. The weight that both devices have, the resolution in the screen, and then the camera, that was a big difference. One had optical zoom and the other didn't have an optical zoom. The battery life, it's also different. And there are other things like for example, that people think about, for example, the gigabytes for memory. So that was not a factor in my decision, because both of the alternatives would come with the same memory options. So you can buy one as big both of them come with the same options for memory, right? So it's not a differentiator. Then the other thing that we do in choosing by advantages is be super clear about the criteria that we're using to evaluate the alternatives. So dimensions, smaller is better. And you may think this is obvious, but it's not. Actually, I had a conversation with one of my colleagues, and for him, bigger was better. And that had to do because he uses glasses, and he wanted to see a bigger screen. And for me, I have small hands, so I want to hold my cell phone more comfortable. So these criteria are not obvious, and if you're making a decision collaboratively with a lot of people, you need to figure out how are you measuring the criteria? How are you going to judge the alternatives? Okay, and you need to be super explicit with the criteria. So weight, less is better. Screen resolution, less is more is better. And in the camera, the optical zoom is better is something that it has it or not. And then battery life, more is better. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to present the next step, which is summarizing the attributes of each alternative. So now that I know I know what I'm judging, and this is back and forth. It's not that linear because I had to do some research on the attributes to understand what attributes will have a difference to put in the tabular method. Here the attributes are closest that we can get to facts. These are things that are characteristics of the alternatives, and that nobody should disagree on them, and you should find evidence that this is how it is. And if you're dealing with something like aesthetics, well, you need to go and find, I mean, who has the authority to say this is nice or ugly or wherever, or you're running a survey to decide that, okay? So here in the attributes, we say the size of the iPhone, it's 4.7, 5.5 inches in diagonal. The weight, it's in grams. The screen resolution, we measure it by pixels. And then the camera, it's for the pixels that it has, plus the optical zoom. And then the battery life in terms of the time, the hours that I can talk with 3G. Can you go to the next one, please? So the next one, it's identifying what's, according to our criteria, smaller is better for dimensions. Then I can say, I'm gonna underline the least preferred attribute. So the worst alternative for that particular factor using the criteria. And then next, I am going to say what are the advantages. So the advantages are the beneficial differences between the attributes of two alternatives. So that means that between 4.7 and 5.5, I have 0.0 inches smaller cell phone. So that's the advantage, is the difference between the two phones. In terms of weight, it's 50 grams less. In terms of screen resolution, the iPhone 7 has 75 pixels more, PPI actually. And then the advantage of the iPhone 7 with regards to the camera, it's that it has 2x optical zoom versus none. And the advantage of the iPhone 7 is it has 7 hours more for talk time and with 3G. Can you go to the next one? So here I highlighted the advantages. So now that we have an agreement of what we have measured to differentiate the alternatives, how we're judging with the criteria, what are the attributes, what are the advantages, it comes a very subjective part, which is deciding the importance of the advantages. So the first, and you can break this down into several pieces. The first break is to think from these advantages, the ones that are highlighted, what is the most important one? And I will call that one the paramount advantage. So I put a heart there to demonstrate that 7 hours talk time with 3G, it's the most important advantage for me. And that had to do because at that time I was traveling a lot with my job, and the battery wasn't enough for the whole day. So 7 more hours made the difference between charging the iPhone, I mean, having enough charge for a day or not, and that made it was a great good. I mean, 7 hours is a significant difference in one day. So it was the most important advantage. So large advantages should have a large importance. So if you go to the next one, then what I started to do is, okay, if 7 hours more talking time, it's my paramount advantage, I'm going to assign 100 points to that. That's this is it's not mathematical. It's something to represent importance. Okay, so it's to have a good conversation around the importance. Okay, so we don't calculate ratios or normalization of attributes, none of that stuff. Okay, this is all conversations about what's important to you, and the scale of importance is just a representation. So then the next advantage was having an optical zoom, 2x optical zoom versus none. I have 2 kids, so I will use this camera to take good pictures of my kids. So that was a good advantage to have. And then the 0.8 inches smaller, yeah, that was useful. I will feel that in my hand, but compared to having a 2 optical zoom and having 7 more hours to talk time, it wasn't that big of a deal. And then 50 grams less, yeah, I'm not gonna really feel the difference. It's not that it's gonna make a big difference. And the 75 PPI more for resolution, probably I'm not gonna be able to recognize that in the screen. So that's the rationale behind those, the importance of the advantages. So the next step will be summarize the importance of the advantages. So as you can say, the iPhone 7 Plus got 200 points of importance of advantages, and the other one had got 100 points of importance of advantages. So now a question that we got a lot, it's, well, yeah, okay, I understand you value more the advantages of the iPhone 7, but what about cost, right? How do we haven't talked about cost in this decision. And this is something that we do very purposely in CBA, which is separating the value of the alternative versus the cost. So the next slide will be actually thinking, oh, okay, so actually the one that I like most is also the most expensive. This is not always the case. In an easy decision, you get the one that you value more, that it's cheaper, and then nothing else to talk about, right? But in this case, the one that I value more because of the advantages has, because it has more talking, more battery life, and it has 2x zoom, it actually costs $100 more than the other one. So the question here is, am I willing to pay $100 more to get the advantages that I want? And my answer was yes. So I got that phone. I have the big one here. So that was my rationale for the decision. And this is really important in projects, right? We have so many conversations that go directly to the cost without understanding the difference between the alternatives and without understanding what's the value for the different stakeholders. And we don't know what we're losing. And the other good thing is that if we separate cost by and importance of advantages, you can actually manage the budget of a project in a more efficient way. Okay, that's the example.
Thank
Question?
you.
Or should we do that at the end?
I think we'll take that at the end perhaps and go through them there. Will that be okay? I don't know if Annette, you have had a look at the questions, if there's anything that's relevant for now.
No, there's no question right now in the chat.
Okay.
Good.
Just a discussion going on.
Good. It's good with engagement. There's a few people who need more battery for their phones, it seems.
Right.
So Annette, I think you are.
Yeah, it's my turn. So you saw this figure before Paz introduced the example, and we will go quickly through the steps again so that we don't forget about it. So first of all, we identified the alternatives, which were the phones, the iPhone 7, the iPhone 7 Plus for Paz. That doesn't mean that there can be only 2 alternatives. There can be also 3, 4, how many there are. So you first see which alternatives you have. Then you define the factors. Like color of the phone could be a factor, right? So this wasn't in this case, but it could be a factor. So then you decide which are the must criteria you want to have and which are the want to have criteria. So if one alternative already doesn't fulfill a must criteria, you can already delete it from your table, because then it's not necessary to have it. Then in the 4th step, you describe the attributes. This is very objective because the phone has the attributes. It's not that you subjectively think about the attributes, they are already there. It's like a characteristic. And then you decide the advantages of each alternative. And before you can, so you compare each attribute in one factor to the other alternative. Okay, if you have that, you have to see what is the most important advantage you like. So that would be the paramount advantage. And based on the paramount advantage, you decide the importance of each advantage, and therefore you're using the scale of importance. Paz used the scale of importance from 0 to 100. You can have also another scale of importance, 0 to 10, 0 to 200, it doesn't matter. You just have to decide how it looks like. Then after that, you summarize all the advantages. And when you have summarize the advantages and you see which alternative have which advantage, in summary, you bring it together with the cost, which was done in the diagram. And the diagram is very important because you see the separation between cost and value, and you can clearly see what you want to, are you willing to pay for which kind of value. So you can make the discussion and the decision based on the diagram. And people will understand why you make a decision. The table is very easy to use, and the nice thing about the table is that it's very transparent. Although you you are not involved in the decision, you will easily understand how a team or a person was having the decision on. So this is very, very easy to follow up for a third party. All right, so these are the steps, but this is not all about CBA. Can you go to the next slide? So CBA is actually based on 4 principles. The first principle is the pivotal cornerstone principle. This means you have to learn how to make decisions and skillfully use sound methods. So I guess most of you are beginners, so accept that you are beginners and try to do it. Just try it out, and if you have questions, you can come to us. Then the second principle is the fundamental rule of sound decision making. So decisions must be based on the importance of advantages, so that we compare the alternatives on the differences and not just on factors, because factors you can easily, people don't know what you mean with a factor. There are 2 different things in factors. What Paz means with the phone, for example, where you had the criteria, you could say, for me, it's important to have a small phone. For another person, it could be important to have a big phone, right? With a big screen. But if you just write size, you don't know which direction it is. The third principle is the principle of anchoring. So decisions must be anchored to the relevant facts, which you do because first you're using the advantages and the differences between the alternatives. And secondly, you're using the paramount advantage as the anchor for comparing all the others' advantages. Based also on the importance scale. Then the 4th and last principle is that different types of decisions call for different types of methods. What what's meant to be with this one is that the Tableau method is only one method in the CBA system. There are also different methods in the CBA system. So based on the complexity of your decision, you could also use another CBA method like the two-list method to come to a conclusion. Okay, so this is a short overview of a hopefully understandable theory part. And now it's Rennie's turn.
Thank you, Paz.
We have a lot of questions.
Is there a lot? Should we take a few of those now, or?
The method, yeah, I think it will be good to go through those before going through the.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, if you read them out, Paz, and then we can answer them now. We have a few minutes. We can do that now.
Can you explain how to scale and compare the different advantages? I guess step 6. Do you want to take that, or should I?
On scale, on the advantages?
Yeah.
Well, I can tell a bit from the case on it.
So just a quick explanation. As I said, it's not a mathematical process. It's more a conversation, and the scales are really used to represent the importance of the advantages. And there are several ways of doing it. You can use Post-it notes and discuss them and move them up and down. If you're with a group of people, you can use a scale and start thinking the first one that you have to decide is the Paramount advantage, and then you start to compare against that. So it's an ongoing comparison and conversation process going on. What if the result of 2 alternatives is the same advantage? Okay, so there are attributes, right? If the attributes are the same, there's no advantage. If the attribute is the same for all the alternatives, there's no advantage. And then therefore you don't consider that because it doesn't differentiate between the alternatives. If you have more alternatives, more than 2 alternatives, you have 3 alternatives and 2 have the same advantage, then you will consider the 2 of them as the same importance. Okay. And then what do we mean by sound? You want to take that one on it?
Yeah, well, I would like to add something to the previous question. Sure. I think the most important, the hard point, which is very difficult for most people, is to not start putting factors on the scale of importance. So the most important thing is that you really take the advantages, the differences between the alternatives, and not the factors to the scale of importance, because that's what quite often easily happens. Then people start putting factors on the scale and try to figuring out how the factors work on the scale. But this is also when we come to sound and unsound decision making, that would be unsound. If you just take the factors, what we usually do when people have a method of weighting factors, you're just weighting factors without having any anchor and without knowing what you really mean in the factor. So this is unsound. So for example, if you weight factors, if you have weight pros and cons, because a con, for example, is just the difference in the perspective of a pro, this would be unsound. If you just weight attributes, this would be unsound. So unsound, it's actually based on the question you're going to ask. The question of an unsound method is more like, which factor is more relevant to me? For example, in the phone, it could be size or color. This would be an unsound, because how do you compare size and color? How do you weight that? But if you have a sound method, you would ask, like CBA, you would ask which advantage is more important in the decision? The difference in color, or the difference, or the advantage in color, or the advantage in size? Mm-hmm. So you're going on the advantages, on the differences.
Yeah, if there is an advantage in color, for example, in this case, you can get all phones the same colors, right? So, but people will say, I mean, you will listen this also in projects. right? Well, color is super important, and you will have a discussion between what's more important, color or size. And it doesn't make any sense. I mean, that discussion doesn't make any sense. It's not going to get anything productive at the end of the discussion.
That's actually some of the things we had the discussion on this project when we started, because the same question came up here quite a lot when we had to do decisions on our project, is how do you make this scale, and what is the sound decision and all of that. And quite soon it became clear that it's all about conversations. And it's very important to people to differentiate that when you're making a decision, there's some things that has an influence on the decision of you going with one alternative or the other alternative. And just because safety, is not considered in the decision, doesn't mean that safety is not important. Safety is really important for the design you will choose, but it doesn't have always an impact on when you make the decision. So it's just making that difference there, and especially I think for our designers that has been a bit difficult in the beginning. Were there more questions passed? Otherwise, I'll go a bit forward now, and we can catch up.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Good. So the example, the case is the project I'm working on. It's a complicated tunnel project east of London that will be the third biggest of its kind in the world. A lot of connecting roads as well, going through communities, which is not really popular. It's quite big when it comes to the cost as well, of course. And at the moment, we're actually right now in consultation and going out to explain to people why the alignment looks like it does and why the design looks like it does. And actually in this process, it has shown really important that we can explain some of the major design decisions clearly to the public. And actually the CBA has helped do that. So what we started doing on the project was to start CBA for complicated design solutions. So it could be that we can make, for example, an embankment or a viaduct on a certain part of the project, and then we have to decide which one was the best. And these decisions then actually came quite clear that it was quite a good method to have a cross-disciplinary discussion around some of these things. So it could bring more people in the room and actually proactively impact the decisions. So instead of sending something out for comment after you design something, you actually get the environmental team to come up with opinions or ideas of how to change or add value up front. What we also decided to do was to use the last planner system to plan out these decisions. So we have a lot of different design decisions circling around, and they all impact each other, which was quite difficult to kind of figure out how to deal with that. But last planners is a brilliant tool to do that. Coming back to one of your principles you discussed, Annette, about this is, you have to train and actually learn to make decisions. It quite soon became clear that we needed trained facilitators to actually be able to help and guide these decision processes when they're so complex and so big groups we get together. So we trained 10 facilitators through an extensive program, I think, to come up to a certain standard of actually being able to learn to make decisions. And that group is still getting together every single week for an hour to discuss upcoming decisions and actually plan stuff, and also just to support each other and learn from each other as well across the project. And the things we want to get out of this is make sure that we have transparency about our decisions. We want to have consensus. So it might be that sometimes we make design decisions that are not popular for a certain discipline, but they need to understand why the project as a whole actually going in one direction and not listening to their input. So some disciplines actually need to understand that perhaps they are important for the project, but not for this particular decision. And we just needed to do something else. And the most important thing is actually this continual learning. So right now we have quite a few banked decisions that we have done. We've documented it. And now, because we're getting iterations in the design, we get questions to why we've made certain design decisions. And because we have all documented this in a very simple A3 and done it through the CBA, it's really easy to go back and see this is why we made this decision. And if we need to redo it, we can see easily if any information have changed or not. And there's a lot of discussion going on that at the moment, of course. So our process, this is not like a formal process, but it's kind of to show as well these steps that you've seen a few times now, how we kind of embedded that in the project. We found out actually preparation of making decision is the key. If people take the time out and actually prepare, get the facts right, just defining the decision, kind of what is the motivation for this decision? What are the alternative actually that we're talking about? That point, if you just get through that, you're actually quite far down the maturity line of making decisions, because that's sometimes really difficult. We can sit and discuss decisions a long time and then suddenly find out that actually we didn't discuss the same decision. It was kind of two separate things we're discussing. So preparation is really important for us, and we get early engagement with the decision owners here. We are using a lot of information, sending information packs out to the people who might be involved in it. Then it comes back to this thing about making sure that you base your decisions as much as you can on facts. So before you even start making the factors, criteria, attributes, all of that, just getting your facts right about the different alternatives, and just get through that. And each discipline then have a bit of homework to do, going back and actually looking into it, seen from their perspective, what are the most important things, the most important advantages, differences between the alternatives from their perspective. So each discipline actually prepare a decision like they are the ones to make the decision purely from their perspective, not with the rest of the disciplines in it. That's how they prepare it, because they need to get their facts right before actually getting into the bigger room. Then the first session of the actual decision workshop, that is where they present these facts. So actually they just go around and each discipline then present the facts and their attributes for each of the alternatives. And in that session, you're not allowed to discuss. You can ask questions, but you're not allowed to discuss. That's really important, because the disciplines have to speak up and take responsibility of what they say in this area as well. Then the next session of the workshop is actually doing the assessment, and we do use the Tableau methods. Sometimes, however, we don't get around to actually do the scores and the advantages. Sometimes we need to do that step as well, because that's the only way we actually can get a clear message out around the decision. But sometimes we don't need to do it, because we can see if we only have two alternatives, like Annette said, we can use the two list methods and just see all the advantages is actually in favor of one of them. But getting through this Tableau method there is an iterative process. It's absolutely not linear. It's going back and forward and saying, okay, if we change some of the scores and some of the advantages, does that actually make a difference? So if you don't agree if this advantage should get 50 or 55 importance point, does that actually make a difference on the decision or not? If it doesn't make a difference on the decision, don't even bother going down to these detail level at all. And then at the end, we do try to get cost in the decision as well. Sometimes we don't have assured cost. We only have like estimates or indications. But what it shows is actually quite often the cheapest design decision is also the one with the most advantages. Or we can quite easily take some of the advantages from one of the other alternatives and merge them into this design solution. But before anyone leaves the room, everyone has to agree on what is the recommendation or the decision. What are the risks related to this one? Because risk is really important, and assumptions as well. Because like Paz said in the beginning, making a decision is all about trying to predict the future, which means that you will base it on assumptions, you will base it on certain risks, and you have to be as clear as you can about these. And they might need some actions for further clarification during that session. And like I said, one of the things that we found was actually the best of the CBA is that if you have implemented the decision and it's quite clear, communicated why you made this decision, it's so easy to go back and have a revisit of a decision to see if you need to redo it. If things have changed, if assessment or assumption have changed, if the risk have changed. So you can go back and actually have a look at it. And all design processes are iterative. We just need to deal with it.
Rennie, can you go back, because we have 3 questions here from
okay.
chat. So the first question was, how did the group come through the concept of holding decision confidential?
Decision confidential?
Yeah.
I think with this idea of getting, I mean, everybody their own facts before joining the big room.
Well, the thing is, actually, the question about confidentiality of some of these decisions has always been discussed. You know, how much can and will you share at what point of time? But what I found is actually when people have been through the first CBA session, that's not a question. It's kind of like, you do need to be transparent. You do need to be open about this. And this is a public project, like, you know, like every other public projects. We have to go out and consult on this. We have to share with the public why we do certain things. So so that's not a problem. I don't know if that answered it. Otherwise, you have to rewrite it.
Okay. Then the second question was, how does the group handle correlating decisions?
Can you say that a bit louder?
How does the group handle correlating decisions?
Okay, so that is actually captured in the assumptions. So some of these decisions are interrelated, and you can't make them in isolation, but you do need to progress things based on the knowledge you have at a certain time. Sometimes, even though you would wish that you could wait like to the final day to make this decision, but that means that all the other decisions are not made. So you'll have to capture these things in the assumptions. So by planning it out in collaborative planning or last planner, you find a logical way of putting the decisions up there, and then you capture the interrelations in the assumptions, which means that you perhaps sometimes do need to go back and forward a few times.
Then the last question was, how can you get lessons learned, for example, after knowing the decision was bad?
Well, if a decision is bad, I think that's again a subjective opinion. So we have a lot of decisions on this project that certain stakeholders or disciplines thinks are bad because they don't like the recommendation, but we have never ever had a decision where people left the room without understanding why this was the recommendation. I think that is important. You can disagree from your own professional perspective, but from a holistic perspective of the project, we do need to reach the best recommendations by doing this. Sometimes though, we had one workshop in particular where everyone in the room felt really bad about the decision, the recommendation we made, because everyone had a gut feeling that it was wrong. But we didn't have the documentation, we didn't have the facts to prove it. So we just made a very strong case of writing up the risk related to this one, and it came up really high in the risk register as well. So it is being managed by the risk team at the moment, because all of us still feel that we reached a conclusion that might not stand the test in practice. So the thing on what we found on a project like this is that what I love about some of these lean tools is that they can be scaled to fit the complexity of what is needed. So you saw an example now of how to choose a mobile phone, and that is kind of a really good method to get through that. If you're not able to reach all the steps in the method, you don't get all the benefits out of it, but you'll still get much better decisions than if you don't use a method. So just being structured about making decisions is really, really critical. I find also separating facts from opinion has helped us a great deal. We had a lot of people who would have opinions on other people's behalf, which was such a pain in the ass, to be honest. But now just asking people about bringing forward their facts, and if they can actually document it, or if they are willing to take the responsibility of what they put forward there, makes it much easier. And the discussion then are based on more reaching consensus. There's a lot more collaboration in it, and we bring a lot more ideas to it. I'm also the value manager of the program, and we have so many great ideas in these workshops where we're actually adding value. So we're bringing more things into the project that we thought was possible without putting more cost in there as well. Also closing down the discussion. So a lot of decisions can circle around forever and ever and ever, and you think, I think we decided that 2 months ago. But by having this system in place and having so many people responsible for the decisions, we only revisit the decision when we have new information. And it shows, and no, Paz, you can say that as well, that we are using less and less time reaching the consensus for each decision. So the more people that are trained in actually doing decisions, the more efficient the process will actually be. So that was just a few things on a case where I think we're up to have, I don't know, 20 or something major decisions made by this, and I don't even know the numbers of smaller decisions going through this method.
Okay, here's one question. How did you choose the people to train?
From my perspective, that is, we went through the Lean network. So we already had a Lean Champions group, which were people interested in doing Lean. And then it was people who had the personal skills of facilitation, because for this project, it needs a bit of strong facilitation to make sure that you can actually keep people on track on the discussions. So it's people who wanted to know more about Lean and who were personally skilled to actually facilitate. And it showed also that we went out quite broad in the team. So we have a facilitators group now that have representatives from construction team, from project controls team, from tunnel team, from sustainability team, quality team, lean and value management team, benefits team. So we're actually going across the whole project with these and have a lot of different skills in it as well. And I think that is really strength for this group.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's Olga.
Yeah. So now we have a few minutes left if there's more questions for us now.
Okay. What does the risk team do? Is a question.
Well, they manage the risk of the program here, of course. So in particular in these workshops, we are highlighting a lot of risk related to the decisions. So it's important that these risks are not just captured and put in a spreadsheet somewhere and stored on a shelf, but people are actually going out and managing them. So for some of the design decisions, of course, it could be lack of geotech information because our geotech is not that mature at the moment, so we don't have all the results for all the surveys yet. So we put in an assumption that we assume this design will be suitable for the ground conditions in that particular area, but that is then a risk that needs to be kind of controlled. So at some point, someone needs to confirm with the survey information that that's actually true.
Well, I think you have a great system in place, Randy. It's very impressive the amount of decisions that you're going through and how your team's taking over them.
You know what, the best compliment, I just got that last week, which was that we had people working on the project that have moved on to another project, and they just asked whether or not we can actually support them and teaching them how to make decisions on this new project. And I think that is actually where we can show that it really works if that people actually request it to happen again. With House England, we're also trying to set up some research or investigations on if we can actually prove that the decisions we're making are taking we're not always taking the cheapest solution for sure, but by having this process in place, we will get additional value for every single decision we're making. So every workshop adds values to the design.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, we have just 10 more minutes, so maybe we should go over the last part.
Yeah, if there's no more questions, feel free to keep.
Here's one. Tell me more about training.
Well, the best training you can get actually is to get involved in this group and keep discussing here as well, because you know already now by going through this webinar some of the basics of it, and it's a bit learning by doing, in my opinion. You will sometimes get hurt by doing that, but you'll learn from it, and just discussing it with other people who have actually done it before is quite useful. I don't know, Passanet, if you have anything else to add to that.
No open source. Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, I think it's the same. Like the more you learn, or the more you do the the CBA method, the more questions come up, right?
Yeah.
So that's what happened to me, because it's like always, you start first and think this is so easy, I can do it right away, and then you start and then you see and more questions come and you see like there's more behind it. I mean, and that's also captured in these principles, and it takes you a while to understand the principles. That happened to me actually.
Yeah. Yeah, so do we have case studies, white papers available? A lot of them go to our web page. There's all the cases that we have, all the learnings. I mean, there's a big deal about conversations. Because at the end, there's a lot of conversations that need to happen. There's a lot of material and a lot of things, and we're doing our best to share what we know with the world. And yeah, go ahead, Randy.
No, I think you're doing brilliant. Yeah.
We have some blog posts also in our in our webpage. So we have case studies, papers. We have some journal papers that we cannot share openly. You guys, if you're in a university, you can get them. We have videos from conferences. We do these webinars, and we're always looking for practical applications and for more cases and for people to share. So if you guys are trying something, are doing choosing by advantages, are mixing it with other lean tools, or you're interested in how to take this to a particular area of interest, and you want to share with us, please do it. I mean, we want more people working and sharing their their ideas and their learnings. It's not just, we don't want to be here forever doing webinars, the three of us. We want more people. Okay.
Also say, I think this is too important to be kept with a few people. You know, how we do make these major decisions on these major schemes. We have such an impact on the industry. We have such an impact on people's life for generations. So please go out and spread the news that making decisions in construction industry is really important, and no one is really paying attention to it right now, in my opinion. I think that is one of the major risks of the industry.
Right. Also, we should add that there's the possibility of writing a blog post, submitting it to us, and then we share it on our webpage too. So we are happy if you want to write a blog post.
Mm-hmm. Oh, all right. Yeah, we have some thank you notes from Shervin. Hi, Shervin.
Didn't know he was here.
Yeah. So
cool.
yeah, to come back to the slides, how to get in touch with us. You can, like, we had our first newsletter 2 weeks ago. So if you want to sign up, you will get the newsletter too. You can also send us message, question. If you have, you inspire, have a question, a research question, however, or you have an idea about research, just send us a message. We are happy to hear your voice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just also, if there's ideas to what webinars we will have to make or should make in the future, that's also nice to know. So yeah, if there's, I don't know if there's questions popping up now, otherwise
No, it's just some people.
We have a few thank you notes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all for joining, and feel free to share the webpage, share some of the material you find there, and just stay in touch. And we will set up another webinar probably after Christmas, I assume, and keep the conversation going on this, because this is too important not to be talked about.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you,
all of you.